Now we are going to have a demonstration of what it's like to log into a router. Now when we did this live, class participants got to do everything and more that I'll be showing you. Since we don't know what equipment you might have on your end, we're not able to ask you to do this as well. So this part is just for demonstration of the sorts of things that we have on the inside of our class router, electronically, of course. We did not break any apart physically. Even though it's sometimes tempting, definitely tempting to do that. When we log in, the first thing that we see is the password that I talked about earlier. In this case, we're using the default password, which you're not going to be able to see here, but it's admin. That's for this router. An important note, if you are still using the default password for your router, please change it. The default passwords for all routers are easily found on the internet, and that would allow someone to have unauthorized access. So we don't want to have that happening. So chances are your password has a router. I'm sorry, your router has a password, and that password should be written down and accessible to you. Written down in a couple of places that are secure, just so that you don't lose it. So I'm going to click the login button now and take a look at the first screen that we see. I'm also going to maximize our screen here so that it's nice and big and we don't see anything else in our way other than those tabs at the top. So if you look at the instructions that you have, there's a handout that goes over our setup for this particular model of router. You'll see that Cisco Green has the IP address of 192.168.20.1. That is our internal private IP address that helps us access here. So again, this is just a little demonstration, and I want to show you where to look when you first log into your router, because it can be intimidating if you don't do this a lot. The thing that I want you to know first is don't worry about understanding what every button does and what every section of this website does, this web interface. Just think about the things that you need to do when you log in and try to focus on that, and I think you'll be able to find your way. So for our class, the first thing we wanted to do is become familiar with what this looked like. So we talk about our internet setup, which is right over here, and in this case, our router is getting its address from our internet service provider through something called DHCP, which is Dynamic Host Control Protocol, and that allows addresses to be assigned from a server or a big server on the other end of that connection. This is how it gets its IP address. We're doing something really, really similar, because in our network setup tab, this is where we control the network, or we define the configuration of the network that we are creating inside of our library, inside of our hypothetical library here with this particular network equipment. And so we're also using private IP addresses, and you see an address, I think, here that looks familiar. It's identical to the one that's up in our tab, and I'm going to go ahead and maximize this as well. I forgot to do that. This IP address is the address of our router, and typically if you're trying to guess where your router is located in terms of IP address, if you're able to look up the IP address that's assigned to your computer, and it's done differently in different computers, but if you're most folks are running Windows, and so if you're running Windows, you can open up a command prompt window. There's different ways to do that with different versions of Windows. So look up the way to open a command prompt window, which is basically a text window that helps you get into the kind of the MS-DOS type of operating system, and type in ipconfig. That's one word, ipconfig, and that will show you the address of your computer and also the address of your gateway, which is again another way of referring to our router. But anyway, this is our internal router address. We have enabled a DHCP server here so that all the devices connecting to our router can get addresses automatically just by connecting either through the wired connection or through our wireless connection. We've started the IP addresses at .100. And we could start that actually anywhere we wanted. We could not use the same address that we were using for the router, so we couldn't use .1. But I do this out of habit. For the purposes of the class, I know that we would not need tons and tons and tons of users here, so I put the maximum number of users at 50. We never even get close to that, of course. But this IP address, I start it here so that I'm reserving IP addresses for other functions. One thing that we like to reserve IP addresses for instance, are printers. Printers that are network printers, printers that are attached to our data networks, are much easier to manage, find, and use when they have a static IP address. So what we could do, for instance, since we've reserved those earlier numbers, if we wanted to assign .99 to our big network printer, we know that that's in a safe range of IP addresses, ones that are not being used in this DHCP situation. And it would be a safe place for a static IP, an IP that doesn't change, for our printer. The first thing that I want to look at changing, and I'm going to give you an example of how something is changing or can be changed, is here in the time settings area. Time settings towards the bottom of the screen. Right now, this is not accurate in any way, shape, or form. I'm actually doing this part of the broadcast from the Mountain Time Zone. Everyone viewing this, most everyone viewing this, is probably in Central Time Zone, unless you're traveling, of course. But we definitely are not. We don't want Pacific time in our for our clock settings here, our time settings. The reason is because the clock is the basis for log files, like when there's something that happens that we want to see how something performed, or we want to go back to check a log for some reason. We want to make sure that the date and time is accurate so we know when something happened, so we can correlate the log file with some sort of physical manifestation. Maybe the network's operating slowly, or someone's getting kicked off the router, things like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply change this to Central Time. So I'm going to select Central Time from the list, and then I have to do something, which is save the settings. This looks like a web page. It is a web page, but for it to actually save the settings on our router, when I make changes, I have to actually select Save Settings. Now, this reboot button is placed in a really bad location for our functions here, because what we might think is, okay, I've changed this setting, I'm going to go reboot the router. Well, if we reboot the router without saving the setting will not stay. But we're not going to do that. We are just going to simply save the settings and then see what happens. Isn't that a beautiful screen? Now you may be following along with the directions, or I'm sorry, the handout that's available for download. And so I'm going to go through the next section of that handout so that you can have more fun in a different place. We're going to go to the wireless tab up here at the top. I'm going to click on wireless. Here is an area that I need to interpret, and I want you to bring your wonderful skills of interpretation. All librarians have them because we work with the public, right? We work with people from all walks of life, and that's part of our skill set. That's part of our toolkit, is to be able to understand people where they are and to assist them. We need to also do that with technology. We need to understand that some person was responsible for designing this, and maybe some of the ways that they express things are not that intuitive, so we've got to dig in a little bit. One is this idea of a network mode. You might look at that and say, network mode, mixed. Okay, great. What does that mean? Why do I care? This is actually where we would have the ability to change or modify the types, the flavors, where we would have the ability to modify the flavors of Wi-Fi that we are offering to folks. And so by our powers of interpretation, by looking at, by clicking on the button and seeing what the options are, we can say that we have wireless N, wireless B, wireless G, wireless B, and G. So if we leave it open, or actually in mixed mode, we can know that this is going to be just fine in supporting all of the different flavors of Wi-Fi offered by our router. And that's okay. The other thing that you'll see in your instructions that that we did in class, I'm not sure that I encourage you to do this with your live router. In fact, if you want to play with a router, I encourage you to do one that is not connected to your library network as your introduction. But in class, what we did is we changed the SSID. Remember, that's the name of our Wi-Fi access point. And we had a lot of fun because after we changed the name, we suddenly had a technical problem. We lost our connection. And so we had to troubleshoot that connection to discover why that happened. And basically it happened because we no longer had that access point and it was disconnected.